Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to talk about one thing that could cause a housing crash and what you need to watch out for. Stick around to the end to see how it affects you and what you can do about it. Also, who will be paying for it. All right, here we go. Go ahead and subscribe right here for more updates and housing market, info. Give me a like right down here and leave a comment down below with anything else you'd like me to talk about. Okay, get into the slides. All right, here it is. What it could be is the mortgage-backed securities or sausages held by the Federal Reserve. A mortgage-backed security, just so you know, when a bank goes ahead and issues you, your neighbor, and everybody else a mortgage, they package it all up and grind it down into what would be considered a sausage if it was food, and then they go ahead and feed it to investors, and the investor holding a large portion of those sausages now is the Federal Reserve. They own 12.3% of U.S. mortgage risk. They own almost $2 trillion in U.S. mortgage-backed securities. That is crazy. That is insane. What that means, well, we'll talk about that in the next slide because it affects you, the taxpayer. But let's talk about what happens if they stop buying. What happens if they sell? Okay, we'll first go over to a chart of the holdings. All right, this is a chart of securities held outright, mortgage-backed securities held by the Federal Reserve. We're at $1.982 trillion. That is quite a bit. I think the average American would take, probably 3 million lifetimes to actually pay that down. So yeah, it's a lot. That's what that means. So that means they hold, let's look at total U.S. mortgage debt and figure out how much they hold. So from their own numbers, what we see back in the housing crisis in 2008-2009, there were $14.7 trillion in U.S. mortgage debt outstanding. Today, do you think that number's less? I'm gonna, if we look at the Fred chart, I like to call this the mortgage debt outstanding bubble indicator. Look at that. We are possibly in a bubble with $15.8 trillion in outstanding mortgage debt. So if we divide that, it's actually supposedly $16.01 trillion in mortgage debt today. This was Q3 2019. We've since moved on, and apparently the latest estimate is 16.01. So we do the math on that. The Federal Reserve owns 12.3% of all U.S. houses. Not really like that, but you get the point. They own a ton of the debt, and if you were to foreclose, guess who gets to sell the property? Well, the Federal Reserve would be on the hook for that going bad, which means they've assumed all the risk. Okay, back to the slide. So the question, what happens if they stop buying mortgage debt? We looked at that chart there, and we'll zoom in a little bit on it, hopefully here. Yeah, I think we can. Yep, here we go. We'll just zoom right in. You can see this is moved up to present day, or as close to present day as we can get. They just keep buying and buying and buying and buying. So what happens if they stop buying? Well, you might ask yourself that question, but let's ask first, why are they buying? We'll scoot that back out a little bit further. There we go. Okay, so they're buying because if they didn't, all the banks would collapse. Yeah, you would literally see like every single bank in the country go ahead and fold up and close their doors because they're holding on to all their toxic mortgage debt, their toxic mortgage-backed sausages that are pretty much worthless. So the question is, why are they buying it? So they're buying the debt because the banks have to have somewhere to go with mortgage-backed securities that aren't producing any profit. People aren't paying. So what the banks do, they package all this garbage up. They might throw a couple good loans in there just to be nice to old Uncle Sam. And they hand it over to him. They say, here you go. There's my collateral. Go ahead and give me, I don't know, that's worth, well, at this point, $1.9 trillion. So the Federal Reserve has paid somebody $1.9 trillion over the last, I don't know, since 2008, 2009 right here, for all of their mortgage-backed sausages. That is where the money for the banks comes from. In one case, they're just selling them a bunch of crappy mortgages. So what happens if they stop buying? If the Federal Reserve stops buying and reduces this amount, that would be if they sold. If they stop buying them, then the banks take on all of that risk. Whoever's holding that mortgage-backed sausage is responsible for it. So guess what? When that goes ahead and fails, and people stop paying their mortgages, like, I don't know, let's look at an unemployment chart. We'll go ahead and pull up ShadowStat's actual unemployment chart as if it was measured by the government's own numbers from the past and see where we're at. So the government here on the red line says that we're about 8.5%, 8% unemployment right now. If we measured it by, normal U6 numbers, people that have been looking for work for more than a long time and aren't counted in the government's official figures anymore, we're way over 10% of people unemployed. ShadowStat's actual figures that show unemployment and include underemployment, I believe, is up here about 27%. So 27% of people in the country are unemployed according to this. Well, let's just go with the government's own numbers here, people. Let's not even worry about the conspiracy theories and ShadowStat's alternate predictions and posting of unemployment statistics. And we'll go with 8%. So if 8% of people are unemployed, that's probably 4% of them are homeowners. So that would mean 4% of people are probably not able to pay their mortgage. So it's possible that 4% of mortgages are going bad right now. They've been entered in forbearance, and those people will not be able to continue paying their mortgage when their forbearance and or the foreclosure moratoriums run out. So what happens? The banks know this. They know the Federal Reserve is going to buy up all of this garbage. So they go ahead and have a low interest rate on their mortgages, and they don't care if they go bad because they're just going to grind them up, put them in a package, and send them over to the Federal Reserve, who will send them money, keeping the banks solvent. Woo! So what happens if they stop buying? The banks will realize this and say, hey, we have a ton more risk now. We have to raise interest rates. The other thing that will happen, some bank one day, think Bear Stearns, Lehman Brothers, something like that, will try to go ahead and sell their mortgage-backed sausages to somebody, and nobody will want them. So that bank will run out of money and completely collapse, being bought up by, not Wachovia, Merrill Lynch or whoever, JP Morgan. Maybe Jamie Dimon wants to buy up whoever collapses next. I don't know. But anyway, that's what happens if the Fed stops buying. That's why they're picking up as much as they can anytime the bank needs it. Okay, so that cannot go on forever. Otherwise, the Federal Reserve will eventually own a majority of the mortgages in the country. So they have to stop buying eventually. That will have the effect of raising interest rates. There are other YouTube performers out there like myself. I'm an entertainer. This isn't financial advice. It can't be. I use a blackboard with a custom font to try to entertain you on mortgage sausages. Think about that, people. Okay, so what will happen if they sell? So eventually what happens, the taxpayers get kind of pissed off that, there's right now on the Federal Reserve's balance sheet, $7 trillion outstanding in debt across different categories, $2 trillion of which, let's say, just to have a round number, is mortgages. So if they start selling, nobody will want to buy them. Maybe they'll buy them for 10 cents on the dollar. So the Federal Reserve went ahead and shelled out $2 trillion, and now they're getting $200 billion back because they're only worth 10 cents on the dollar. I think that math is right. I just kind of did that in my head there. So you, as the taxpayer, will go ahead and have to make up the difference through taxes to go ahead and bail the Federal Reserve out. Either that, or they'll go ahead and just print the money and take care of it themselves, which will have the result of inflation in asset prices. They'll print the money, you won't see any of it, it'll just go to pay for people's mortgages. So that's what happens in these two situations. If they stop buying, the banks collapse and have to raise interest rates, lending tightens. If they start selling it, you as the taxpayer, not us as real estate investors, because we get to write off pretty much all of our income because it's real estate and the most tax favored asset class in the United States. So people that aren't real estate owners will go ahead and have to hold the bag on that and pay for it through taxes. All right, next slide. So what this means for you, this means that the real estate bubble goes pop if the Federal Reserve goes ahead and stops buying mortgage-backed securities or starts selling them. So what you need to watch out for, an indicator, a increaser in likelihood, I guess I was said poorly, but whatever, you get the point, is that if you see news that the Federal Reserve is going to tail off their purchasing of mortgage-backed securities, then you should probably watch the housing market because you're about to see some price declines. That means home prices drop, which was our next thing, price declines. So since nobody is able to get a home at a low interest rate, the banks will be raising interest rates so they can actually make money on these mortgages with the risk, since the Federal Reserve and federal government won't be purchasing their crappy loans that are failing. It's going to be more expensive for people to buy houses because their interest rate just doubled up to, they're super low right now, but they could double up to like 4% if you see this happen, or 5%. The banks will have to do that, otherwise they'll lose a ton of money on the retail side because guess what? They're responsible for their sausages at that point. When the Federal Reserve tailors that, reduces their spending on mortgage-backed securities, the banks will freeze lending like they did back in 2008, 2009. It'll become so hard to get a loan that very few borrowers will actually qualify. So if you want a house and you see this news come through, again, not financial advice. I'm not your realtor. You should probably talk to them and your mortgage broker and your investment advisor about this. If you see that news come through, you can plan on lending freezing within, 3 to 6 months of that coming through. So what you'll want to do if you want to buy a house is go ahead and get one. But if you hang out there, you'll likely see prices come way down in the market. You'll see more foreclosures. You'll see a ton of stuff hit the market as people try to get out of it and can't sell their home. It'll just be a huge wall of inventory building up. And the final thing that happens, taxpayers get to hold the bag. Again, not you as a real estate investor, because 90% of your income should be getting written off with tax deductions. So taxpayers holding the bag. The banks will go ahead and try to dump their mortgages and sausages over onto the Federal Reserve. Old Jerome Powell over there will say, no, I'm not taking those. They are garbage. I am not buying any more of that crap from you. I already gave you $2 trillion. So he'll throw it back at them. And then that bank will go ahead and collapse because there's nothing they can do. People aren't paying their mortgages and they are technically insolvent even at this point, and will be even more so to a more obvious point where they have to collapse when the Federal Reserve goes ahead and stops buying that. So then you'll get stuck holding the bag, not only of banks collapsing and governments bailing them out, but also all of these toxic mortgage-backed sausages that are on the Federal Reserve's balance sheet. So the only way out of this is what I'm saying is a huge increase in taxes. That's why you will probably see the Federal Reserve. This is my prediction. I'm not a fortune teller again. I would just say this is what would likely happen. So if the Federal Reserve came out and said they're not buying any more mortgage-backed securities, the banks would freak out, interest rates would go through the roof, the economy would start to freeze. because nobody's buying houses anymore. Home prices would drop. As soon as this happened, you would see politicians in Washington just go crazy. Their face masks would be flying off. They'd be spitting in the face of the Federal Reserve, blaming everything on Fed policy. So then you would see a rapid change in the head of the Federal Reserve from Jerome Powell, or whoever it is at that time, to a new person. And that person would go ahead and be more dovish on everything and keep buying mortgage-backed securities. But you would have a great opportunity there as an investor to pick up some cheap properties when all that happens. And there would be a further reverberation in the market that I'm sure we'll talk about later if all of that came to be. There you go. That's what will happen to you if you see news of the Federal Reserve tailoring off or stopping buying mortgage-backed securities. If you see that news come through, go ahead and watch a little closer because you will see some fireworks. All right, back to the first slide. That'll do it for one thing that could cause a housing crash. It would be epic. It would be incredible. It would be the best time ever to be a real estate investor because property would basically be free. Again, I'm not trying to predict this. I'm just saying there's a likelihood that in the future the Federal Reserve will try to tailor their purchase of mortgage-backed securities, and you will, or reduce their purchase of mortgage-backed securities, and you will see some big moves in home prices and possibly some bank collapses. All right, go ahead and remember to watch this video here, subscribe right here, and leave a comment if there's anything else you want me to discuss. Y'all take her easy out there.